and you cannot buy. Finding a way when you cannot see. Man with this system, he cannot pray. I need to find relief.
What's good, y'all, and welcome to another episode of Peace of Mind, where we value our health, our body, and our time. And today I'm coming back with you with another episode, and we're talking about the subtle art of forgiveness. So the reason why I picked this episode is really because it's been on my mind heavy just a lot with different situations and circumstances and relationships that I've been going through in times past, whether that's friendships, family, whatever it constitutes, might be, might not be. And I just prepared a couple of questions for myself to talk about the subtle art of forgiveness, what that looks like, what that is and what that is in my perspective, in my opinion, my point of view. And I wanted to share with all of you. So the first thing is, why is it important to forgive others? And for me, at least, I think it's important to forgive others because it really does a lot more for you, a lot more for yourself in terms of how you navigate certain spaces, how you think about certain spaces, how much energy you might have to put in certain spaces. And I know people navigate things differently, people think about things differently, but at least in my point of view, my perspective, when I'm angry with somebody or frustrated with somebody and I don't necessarily want to communicate with them at the time being, I'm quick to adjust my environment, adjust my space, and make sure that it's not being tampered with by anybody else. So that's kind of like the plus or the boundary setting that I have on that side. But I think that the negative or the challenge to that is I have to put in a lot more energy, a lot more thought power, a lot more navigation to make sure that I'm upheld that boundary. And sometimes it gets pretty tiring. Sometimes it can be exhausting. And the truth is, I really just don't want to do that. So I think that there's a pro and a con to everything that we do. But in terms of why it's important to forgive for me is because it allows me to have a peace of mind. It allows me to navigate certain spaces very smoothly, very easily, and I don't have to overthink about what I'm doing. So that's why it's important to forgive others for me. I would love to hear why it's important to forgive others for you, or why you might have a different perspective, why you might not agree with my perspective or have different thoughts. And that's 100% okay. I think that this podcast serves as a point of not necessarily agreeing versus disagreeing, rather than just sharing different angles or different point of views of how you perceive life, how you navigate life, what you think about life. So that's my first big topic, is why it's important to forgive, because it really allows me to have a clean heart, a clean mind. And even if someone has done me wrong, because I know that I've done things to other people that have hurt their feelings, whether that's intentionally or unintentionally in my past as well. And I think that a goal of mine is continuous growth, whether that's 1% better every day or 10%. So the next thing is, why is it so hard to forgive others? Oof. I think it's so difficult for me to forgive others because I try to come in situations and mindsets with a positive intent, with no malicious, with no harm. So when someone does me harm or someone does me malpractice, I feel hurt. I think that under all of the layers, that's what it really is. And a lot of people will claim that they're not hurt, or that they're not angry, they're not mad, they're not frustrated, like someone can't allow me to be like that. But the truth is, we're hurt, we're sad, and sometimes we don't want people to know that because it can feel embarrassing, but there should be nothing embarrassing about that. So I think why it can be hard to forgive others is if it blindsides us or comes out of nowhere, and it hurt so bad when we had no intention of doing that to the other person, we don't want to allow ourselves to be in a position or a situation where that could happen again. A lot of people from conversations feel like if it happens one time, that the person is capable of doing it again. And it takes a huge level of trust to allow someone on that inner circle of safety to open up to them completely. Because I think that you can do 100 things right, 100 things well, But in some situations, the one moment that you do something that might not be as accepted, it can break down so many layers of friendship, trust, relationships that you might have with that person. So for me, why it's so hard to forgive others is because if I come in with a positive intent, then I'm expecting the other person to do the same. And maybe they are, but if their impact lands negatively, then I'm frustrated, then I'm mad, then I'm angry. And I really don't want to take the time, energy, or space to decipher why they did this, what was their intention of doing this, if there's other things that is going on in my life as well. So it really just depends. I think that for me it's discernment, but it can be difficult to forgive others. Even when I say that I do, my actions, my thoughts, my navigation might be different than what it once was, and I'm still trying to grow in that area and grow in that space. So it takes time, but that's my perspective. The next thing is teaching me how to forgive and move forward with wisdom and trauma. So even connected to our last one, maybe some people don't know how to forgive and we think we do, and we think it might be just as simple as like, okay, I forgive you 100% and completely, let's just do what we did. Let's go back to navigating the lifestyle. And that might not be the lifestyle you want to do, because if living that current lifestyle is what brought up the obstacles and the challenges in the first place, naturally and organically, then why would you want to go back to doing the exact same thing again? Forgiveness can be allowing that person back in your life, maybe not necessarily as close to your life. Maybe it's a long distance relationship. Maybe it's taking a foot apart, but still not having any hatred, any anger, any frustrations, any built up aggression from the previous experiences that you've encountered with that person. So I think it can be truly interesting of learning how to forgive and what forgiveness looks like for you. Because what it looks like for me can be 100% different, can be completely different at that. And sometimes we get advice from our friends or from our wise ones or our loved ones, and we run towards that advice. Okay, this worked for you, let me try that. But it might be completely different than what you actually want to do. So learning how to forgive and moving forward with wisdom, taking that experience that once you once had and not allowing the same situations to occur again, or identical situations, especially if it wasn't an outcome that you were necessarily fond of. You know what I mean? So I think that that's something that I have gotten extremely better with over time. I'm not a subject matter expert in that field, but I have grown a lot, and I think I'm good at it, of looking at my past previous experiences, mistakes, and not wanting to repeat an identical situation, because to me, time is money, money is time, and life is such a valuable, nurturing experience. So being able to repeating the same situations over and over again is just not ideal for me. I don't like repetition. I don't like redundancy. So it can be difficult to not learn from what I currently went through or previously went through. And it's also important not to bring your trauma from past previous relationships into future relationships as well. And I think that can be so difficult, and there's such a fine line of when someone might call that out, or when someone says you might be acting a certain way, and your balance of saying that you're using the situations from your past relationships to grow and navigate spaces different, and they're coming into your life at a certain point, versus those experiences impacting you and or your partner and or other relationships in a negative manner. So having the discernment and listening to people who might be wise in that situation, who are showing well outcomes that could relate over to you, and finding that area of growth that really works for you in your customizable life, in your pathway. So that's important. Another thing is what happens when we don't truly forgive. I think bad things happen. When we don't truly forgive, I think that we're stating that when we're in a position when we want someone to forgive us, we're letting the door and our energy be open to that same thing as well. And I feel like I've been on both sides of the equation at different points of my life where I've wanted forgiveness wholeheartedly and completely, and that person wasn't willing or ready to forgive me at that time, and it hurt a lot. especially since I had so much love for the person and I looked up to the person and I really wanted to be close to that person. And that's really what reminded me intent versus impact. Like the way that we intend to love someone and the way that it actually affects them can be two completely different things. Because if I say that I want to shower you with love and the way I want to shower you is causing detriment or rain or X, Y, and Z to your lifestyle, then do I want to keep doing that with knowing the impact of how my actions are coming across? Or do I want to find a different way to love you if it is truly about me solely giving you love? So I think that when it comes down to what happens when we don't truly forgive, it allows judgment on the other side. It allows people to maybe not truly forgive us in future situations as well based off of our mindset. It allows us to have depression at times, frustration, anger, and other emotions that might boil up. And I think that forgiveness and boundary setting are two completely different things, right? When you're talking about boundary setting, you can forgive somebody and still not allow them to have an identical approach to what they did last time based off of your preferences. But there is a certain line and there's a certain period of how far you should go with that in terms of, okay, let me give this person a second chance, especially if I don't believe everybody on this planet and everybody on this earth is perfect. We're going to make mistakes. So allowing that person to make mistakes and learning and listening from those mistakes so identical situations don't happen. Is forgiveness for me, you, or both of us? I think it's both of us. I think that there's a huge overlap for sure. I think that a lot of my forgiveness at this time is necessarily for me because I love a lot. My brain thinks a lot. I really love treating people well. That's my intent. My impact does not come off the best all the time, and I'm always constantly learning about how I can navigate that space in different situations and learning from my mistakes because I'm human. I'm imperfect. I know that. I'm aware of that. And I want to grow from that. And I think that that's a huge part of my puzzle is recognizing that I have to give myself more grace because when I mess up, I feel like sometimes I mess up bad and it hurts a lot. And I see the way that I hurt other people and that's not my intended focus, but that's what happens sometimes. So listening to that person of how I impacted that person and how I navigated those certain spaces and how I can do better in the future with that specific person or with somebody else because I don't want anyone on this planet to be hurt because we're all living and navigating this space that we weren't aware of, that we wasn't familiar with. So it can be difficult at times, for sure. Why do we ask for forgiveness but don't extend the same level of forgiveness to others? I think it depends on the situation and on the circumstance, right? Like if you do something to my family or my mom or my dad or my parents, something harmful, something physical, even something verbal, it might be harder for me to forgive, especially depending on how much intimacy, how much vulnerability, how much transparency I have on what I'm trying to forgive you over versus me having a McDonald's cheeseburger. I'm going to be like, wow, that was crazy, right? But I'm going to forgive you a lot quicker. I might be able to process it a lot more. So I think that it depends on the situation, on the circumstances. There's so many variable factors on if you were aware of what you were doing. Is this the first time you were doing it? Did I tell you how important this specific situation and circumstance was and or is for me? Like, I think forgiveness has a lot of layers and understanding the context behind information is extremely important when navigating certain spaces of forgiveness and how long it takes. I think that for me, no matter what the circumstances, I'm always willing to forgive somebody else. But the duration and the time period of which it takes me to forgive is a completely different story because I do want to forgive you, but I want to forgive you genuinely as well. I want to forgive you when I know that I can do so wholeheartedly in an approach, the environment, the situation, in the relationship where I'm not having bent up aggression or second thoughts based off of what you did in prior years because that wouldn't be fair to you, especially if you thought that we were on the exact same page and chapter and book. Do we ever truly forgive someone for their words or actions? I can only speak for me. I think that I do. I think that when I truly forgive someone, I used to think that that means that we're going back to the current state of what things were. identically to how things moved or operated. And as I get older, I'm realizing that's not true. Someone can say, you know what, I completely forgive you, Chris, but I don't want to go back to the lifestyle that we once had because it wasn't fun to me. It wasn't happy to me. It wasn't joyful to me. It wasn't ideal for me. And a lot of people think that as soon as you say forgiveness is key, that we're moving back into what we once had, when that's not necessarily the case. So having to navigate and adapt certain situations and circumstances and realizing that that is the new normal, and you have to ask yourself, can you accept what is? And maybe you can, but maybe not at this time. Or maybe you can. Yeah, maybe you can. Maybe you can, but not at this time. Or maybe you can't. Maybe you're not willing to go to the new normal. And that's also 100% okay too, because it takes two to make a relationship work. Platonic, non-platonic, family or not. And if both people are not invested in it mentally and consciously, then I don't think that it will be as fruitful as both people want it to be, rather than it feeling like a chore. What comes after forgiveness? New actions, new recommendations, new thoughts, new ways of navigating that relationship, that circumstance, that space. Excuse me. And sometimes you don't know the answer. Like, I've forgiven others and I don't necessarily know what I want out of the relationship right now, how I want to navigate this space, and wanting time to figure that out. Yeah. Not wanting to feel controlled, not wanting to feel like I have to be pigeonholed in a situation or a circumstance. If I need time to process my thoughts, feelings, comments, or actions, not being forced to agree upon on a circumstance that you need to answer me today or tomorrow, or sometimes saying the things if I don't understand why you takes you so long to process your thoughts. Like, I understand the confusion, but once I explain why it takes me so long, understanding how that works for me in my brain, and I'm hearing you on the other side as well, but it takes time. And people are uncomfortable with time because time is such an unstructured concept. So I get that. I think that that's something I'm still navigating. It's something that I'm still growing in, but it's different per person. Do we let our past memories and experiences impact the present moment? I know I do. I know I do a lot. I know that I don't want to as much as I do, because I'm always thinking that something that I did or something that occurred in the past is how we got here. And maybe it is, right? Because that's how we started moving and navigating different spaces. But I just want things to be so peaceful. I want things to be so mindful. I want things to be so helpful. So when it isn't, I can't help but to think that if we were on a good trajectory, a good pathway at once upon a time in life, that it's different now because of what has happened. And I think that me focusing on that moment sometimes actually allows more detrimental things or more obstacles or challenges to come up, instead of just allowing what is or what to be to be. So it can be hard, it can be difficult, it can be frustrating. Something else that I'm still learning. And that's why I came on this podcast as well, because it's not like Chris is the master of forgiveness, because the Lord knows that I'm not. I try my best and I try my hardest to forgive, because I even recognize as I get older, I want people to forgive me for being an imperfect human being as well. But it can be difficult, it can be challenging. So, yeah, I took a pause because it's hard. Just like mastering how our past moments affect us today. Even one of my friends told me recently, I didn't manage my time well, and we were supposed to link up 2 days in a row. It didn't necessarily happen the way that I wanted it to. They were frustrated, and they said they felt like people weren't valuing their time. And I told them that that wasn't necessarily the case with me, but they said they was just fed up with it. And I asked them if we could reschedule it. They said honestly no, that they didn't want to. So it was unfortunate, but I tried my best with where I was and with what I had. And I really do feel that I tried my best in that circumstance and situation, and it didn't work out the way I wanted to. And I apologized. I explained my reasoning, and I asked for us to reschedule, and they wasn't necessarily in the mindset of doing so at that time, and that's okay. It's okay. Because people need time to think. People need time to live the life that they want to live. And I'm so okay with navigating the space as it comes because I used to be so frustrated and upset about not doing so. And it caused me so much anxiety, so much drainage. And I just don't want to live a season of that right now. I just want to live a season of what is and what isn't. Should we communicate our level of forgiveness to others? I think so. I think that there's a balance. I think that sometimes we don't have to explicitly walk someone through every single thought of how we came to that level of forgiveness or everything that went to our brain. But I do think that there's a balance of giving the other person insight of what happened so we know not to do the exact same thing again. Because how can we be expected not to make the same identical mistakes if we're not getting insight into how we got to the first one, right? But there comes also with vulnerability and transparency with forgiveness and opening up to that person, how we talked about in the beginning of the podcast, because if we were hurt when we were open the first time and we don't want to feel that level of hurt again, it can be difficult to open our hearts and minds of how we impacted other people. Yeah. How many chances do we forgive others? To me, it depends. If somebody's repeating the same identical mistake and you said something to them over and over and over and over again, then maybe fewer chances. If it's different circumstances, but the same thing, maybe a couple of chances. Maybe communicating that you're in a space where you don't necessarily feel like giving as many chances and saying that you're growing tired and wearisome of what's going on and expressing that and communicating that. Maybe if it's something as detrimental that you proactively communicated and they've done it, maybe it's one chance. I think it depends on what you can live with, what can bring you your peace of mind, and if you were to put yourself in the other person's shoes, what level of forgiveness that you would want as well. Because there comes a day where we all have to dance to the music and ask for forgiveness and also provide forgiveness to others. So just navigating and balancing both of those spaces. Excuse me. What courses can we take to begin our journey to forgiveness? For me, what comes to mind is just like my well-being journals, my devotionals, which I'm very religious and spiritual, so both of those, praying, the Bible app, the Bible plan, talking to friends and different people as well. So those are things that I take to begin my journey of forgiveness. It just reminds me on a consistent basis and what helps me to forgive people like as time goes on. So there's that. And my last thing that I would say for this podcast is if you could take one tool from this podcast, I would want you to remember a moment where you asked someone for forgiveness and remember how you felt when you were hoping to receive that level of forgiveness and what happened when you did or you didn't give it to them. And think about this. Is that something you want someone else to experience, a similar level of emotion? And honestly, regardless of if it is, if it isn't, if it's hurt, do you want that person to go through that? And yes, you might say, well, that person put me through that as well. And if it got you in a situation where you know that you didn't want to go through that, think about if you want to be the bigger person, or does it make sense to be the bigger person, or will it make you feel better in the short term or the long run to do so? Because I think overall the goal should be growth, purpose, intentionality, and giving back and serving others one day at a time. So, thank you again for tuning in to another episode of Peace of Mind, where we value our health, our body, and our time. Chris out.
This is the peace that you cannot buy. Finding a way when you cannot see. Man with this system, he cannot pray. I need to find